Good evening, everyone. This is the City Council meeting for Tuesday, September 6th, 2016. And tonight there's really two meetings in one, so you get double for your money. You get the regular City Council meeting, at the end of which we're going to have a short recess and then reconvene for the item 51 on the agenda, which is the budget. So we'll start off by roll call and determination of quorum.
Nordstrom. Here. Drew. Here. Solomon. Here. Doyle. Here. Estes. Here. Scott. Here. Laurenti. Here. Wright. Here. Modrick. Here. Roberts. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll have the invocation by Cheryl Arweo and followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we just come before you this evening. We want to thank you, Lord, for this time that we can come together. And Father, we thank you for our city council members that have given up their time and their efforts to improve this city and make it run like it should. And so, Father, we just want to come before you. We thank you, Lord, for your wisdom that you impart upon us. And Father, we ask tonight that your Holy Spirit would come and give us wisdom and direction in all the decisions that are made. Father, we ask that you would bring unity in the city and in the hearts that are here. We pray for unity in decisions that are made. And Father, we want to pray for the people that are here, for the mayor, for the council members. And Father, we pray for the leaders of this city, that you would give them wisdom and courage and strength to do the jobs that they are imparted to do. Father, we thank you that we can come together to pray for our leaders, and we pray that you would just help the people of this city to come together and remember the leaders, to pray for them. Father, we pray tonight that you would just be with each person here. And Father, we pray for wisdom in all the decisions that are made. We pray for their families, dear Father, that you would be with them. And Father, we pray for law enforcement, that you would protect them as they do their job, and Lord, that you would give them wisdom in every decision that they have to make at a moment's notice. Father, we pray for the school board members, and we pray for the teachers that teach our children, that you would give them the strength. Father, we pray for the families of this city, that you would be with them, and that you would help them to know how important they are, because, Lord, this city is made up of families and individuals. Father, we pray for the organizations in this city, Father, the ones that help the poor, the ones that help the needy, and we pray that you would give the leaders strength and wisdom in these places also. And Father, those that help those who are in crisis, we ask for wisdom for them also. Father, and we just thank you and praise you. And I want to end with Psalm 67. It says, "May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the people praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the people with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you, and the land yield its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him." So, Father God, we pray your blessing upon this time. May all the decisions be made of you. May you guide the hearts of these people here tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. And now we are going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by these fine young men here from Boy Scout Troop 44. Come on up.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Nice job. Now we're on to adoption of the agenda. Does anyone have an issue with the agenda, or is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this agenda. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Now we're going to take a few minutes and have some awards and recognitions down front. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is read a proclamation for Suicide Prevention Week. Whereas in the United States, one person dies by suicide every 12.3 minutes, with 42,773 deaths by suicide in our country during 2014, and 28 deaths by suicide in Pennington County alone in 2015. Whereas in our country, suicide is the second leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. In South Dakota, it is the number one leading cause of death for 12 to 22-year-olds, and is the ninth leading cause of death for people of all ages in South Dakota. Whereas more than twice as many deaths occur by suicide than by homicide, in Rapid City and Pennington County, the number of suicides continue to increase with an average of 2 suicide deaths every month. And whereas each person's death by suicide ultimately affects at least 18 other people, with over 750,000 newly bereaved each year, changing their lives forever. And whereas many of those people who died never received effective behavioral health services for reasons to include difficulty accessing services by healthcare providers trained in best practices to reduce suicide risk, the stigma of using behavioral health treatment, and the stigma associated with losing a loved one to suicide. And whereas Rapid City and Pennington County have been able to effectively practice awareness, education, and treatment of mental illness, which was proven in 2011 with the number of deaths by suicide finally decreased by 36% after an all-time high number in 2010. And whereas it has been acknowledged that suicide is a major health problem and support must be given for educational programs, research projects, intervention services, mental health, substance abuse, and crisis intervention services, including support services for those who've lost someone to suicide. Now therefore, I, Steve Allender, Mayor of Rapid City, in partnership with Carl Jaggeris, Rapid City Police Chief, and Kevin Tome, Sheriff of Pennington County, South Dakota, in support of the Rapid City Suicide Prevention Task Force and the Front Porch Coalition, do hereby proclaim September 5th through the 11th, 2016, as Suicide Prevention Week in Rapid City and Pennington County, and encourage everyone to learn how they can help, because suicide prevention is everyone's business. And now, would you like to say a few words? Okay? All right, well, thank you. This is Stephanie with the Front Porch Coalition, and agency that works right here in Rapid City and has for how many years?
14 years.
14 years. About the same age as these young men right here. No, not quite. Well, thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'd like to call up Dr. Gowan and company. The inductees for the South Dakota Hall of Fame have been named, and 3 of them are Rapid Cityans. We have one of them here tonight, and I'll introduce this gentleman here. This is John. We have one doctor, John Barlow. Another person that can't be here was a Marine in World War II, and I thought this guy looks kind of like a former Marine. So Dr. John Barlow's impressive achievements include scientist, scholar, and teacher. He displays diplomacy and humility in his most impressive achievements, leadership and teaching. In 1965, he joined the Laboratory of Clinical Medicine. His influence helped create a regional reference laboratory, the nucleus of Sioux Valley Hospital Pathology Department. He contributed to development of the medical technology program and pathology residency at Sioux Valley Hospital and in the Sioux Falls Community Blood Bank. He provided oversight for both the 2-year and 4-year medical schools, developing Sioux Valley Hospital into a regional clinical leader. Dr. Barlow travels to outreach hospitals and the USD School of Medicine in Vermilion multiple times per week, directing the pathology department of Sioux Valley Hospital. In 1985, while practicing pathology, he became chairman of the board for the institution in Rapid City, leading it to the integrated medical system for Western South Dakota. And as a token of our appreciation here at the city, we have a certificate of appreciation for Dr. Barlow, memorializing this very important event. And I'll turn over the microphone to Dr. Gowan to further explain.
Ladies and gentlemen, the South Dakota Hall of Fame is indeed privileged to be able to recognize 10 outstanding leaders of South Dakota each year. This year, we will be celebrating these leaders on Friday and Saturday of this week. We're going to be in Chamberlain, and it's a time for celebration. We really appreciate the willingness of people in South Dakota to be supportive of the genius that we have within people like Dr. Barlow. It's been my privilege to serve as the chair of the South Dakota Hall of Fame, and I take this opportunity to thank all of you, particularly the council and the mayor, for letting us join you to celebrate the South Dakota Hall of Fame and our excellent inductees like Dr. Barlow. Thank you very much.
Dr. Barlow, would you like first?
Thank you. Really appreciate this great honor, particularly as I've come to know some of the present inductees and some of the people already in the Hall of Fame. Just to be mentioned along with them is indeed a great privilege and honor. I am not a native of South Dakota, but I've been here over 50 years and was privileged to spend 20 years in Sioux Falls and over 30 years out here in Rapid City, so I got to see both cultures. And indeed, both Ann and I just love this state, and we've been just delighted to be here. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. You bet.
Let's step over here for a picture.
Okay.
The other inductees, William Russell and Jack Redden, could not be here tonight, but will be inducted at the same time. And that was the end of this week, Dr. Gowan?
Friday and Saturday of this week.
Okay, Friday and Saturday this week. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Now we're on to general public comment. It's a time for members of the public to discuss or express items to the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda, except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. So there are 3 speaker request forms here tonight, and when there was only one of them up here, I went and spoke to her, Marion Reed. All 3 of these speaker requests are for item 51 on the agenda, but I offered Mrs. Reed a chance to get her 3 minutes out of the way at the front of the meeting instead of the end, and she took me up on it. So if Wilbur Holds and Susan Bronstein would like to do the same, I think that would be appropriate. If you want to wait until after the regular meeting, during that public comment time, you're certainly welcome to do that. So let's start with Marion Reed. And you have 3 minutes, ma'am.
I'm Marion Reed.
Oh, there's a microphone over there. You'll sound much louder if you go over there.
Stage, so I don't know if there's a big problem, but anyway. Oh, okay. Not having done this before. Right on? Okay. I am here to speak for RSVP, the Retired Service Volunteer Project, that's been in Rapid City since the 1970s. And most of its funding comes from the project, but some of it comes from the city. And the retired service people are people like me who want to do things within the community. It might be working at the hospital for nothing. It might be tutoring at the Career Learning Center or in the schools. It can be answering telephones someplace. People like me have education and experience, and we have knowledge of Rapid City. And sometimes a person loses a husband, for example, or a wife, and it sort of leaves a hole in the life, a feeling of not being needed any longer. Being retired can make a person feel he or she is not needed anymore. And one of the things we have discovered, which you might find surprising, that some 600 of us in Rapid City who volunteer in various places and various times. And we found that it lowers blood pressure, if you could believe that. To feel useful, to feel that I am really contributing. I don't have to sit home and just watch TV. And when I'm out there, I'm meeting people to smile, to say hello, whatever it may be. And RSVP is the one that collects people like me and encourages us. And if we don't show up, let us say, for something that we are usually doing, whether it's driving for Meals on Wheels or whatever, somebody's going to check on us because we have made ourselves feel needed. So RSVP would like the council to know that we really appreciate what the council does for RSVP to keep us operating, to keep us out there. And those 600 plus people are really very valuable in this community, and this community is valuable for them. So I just wanted you to know that, and you have a good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Holmes, would you like to speak now or later? Later. Okay, and Susan? Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're on to non-public hearing items, items 3 through 43. There are no speaker requests for those items, so we won't have a public comment time. We'll move on to consent items, items 3 through 34. Does the council wish to pull any of these items off consent? And we'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 19.
Are there any other items to be pulled? Seeing none, then can we have a motion to approve consent calendar with the exception of 19?
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 19, to deny the request from James Tiltram for a variance to waive the requirement to install sidewalk per City Ordinance 12.08.060 along Century Road in Rapid City, and we'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I make a motion to continues the word I was looking, continue this to the next Public Works meeting if I could, and if I could get a second, I'll explain. Second. Thank you. I received a call today from Dale Tech and the design professional for this project, and they're working together on trying to figure out an appropriate location for the sidewalk, and there could be some easement issues and stuff they have to work out. So anyway, they asked me to continue this. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to postpone item 19 to the next Public Works Committee meeting. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Takes us through consent. Now on to non-consent items, items 35 through 43. There are no speaker requests on those items, so we won't have a public comment period. We'll start with the number 35 under ordinances. We'll go to our legal finance chair, John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Number 35, second reading, ordinance number 6141, an ordinance to update the regulations related to purchases made by department directors by amending section 3.04.030 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and I recommend approval.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
36, first reading ordinance number 6139, an ordinance to clarify requirements for installation of sidewalks by amending chapter 12.08 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and I recommend approval.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Was that by Jerry, right? And all in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item, please.
37, first reading ordinance 6137 regarding supplemental appropriation number 3 for 2016, and I recommend approval.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval. We'll go to Amanda Scott now.
Thank you, Mayor. May I ask Pauline Sumption a quick question, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Pauline, I didn't have time to read the actual attachment on this one. Were there any changes between what was at Legal and Finance versus what's on the published agenda for the supplemental appropriation number 3?
No, this is still the first reading, and what you saw on last week is still what you will see today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Motion is for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item, please.
Number 38, first reading ordinance number 6104, an ordinance to amend certain provisions in the Rapid City Plumbing Code by amending chapter 15.24 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and I recommend approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a couple seconds. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item, please.
39, first reading ordinance number 6105, an ordinance to amend certain provisions in the Rapid City Electrical Code by amending section 15.16.020 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and I recommend approval.
Motion and a second for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item.
Number 40, first reading ordinance 6106, an ordinance to amend certain provisions regarding contractor licenses by amending section 15.04.140 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and I recommend approval.
Okay, a motion and a second on that for approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 41.
First reading ordinance 6136, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by Dirk Jablonski, ACES for Mike Cull, Pennington County, for rezoning from high-density residential district to public district for property generally described as being located at 308 Quincy Street, and I recommend approval.
We have a motion and a second for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 42, please.
Approve request to remove stipulations requiring the applicant to sign a waiver of right to protest for a variance to install sidewalks adjacent to 3515 Seeger Drive granted by the City Council on July 18th, 2016, and I recommend approval.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval. We'll go to Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to support this motion a little bit reluctantly, though, but it seems like we're put in this position of changing our minds on this change for this ordinance. So I approved or went along with the motion the first time around because it felt like we were out in an area where it was difficult to install sidewalks, and now we're going to take away the warp off of this and not require a warp. So it's just a little odd for me to accept it this way. So thank you, Mayor. I will go along with this reluctantly.
Okay, it is a little odd, but I think we can have a little bit of pride for recognizing when something's really not doing what we were hoping it would do and being able to change course. So we have a motion and a second to approve 42. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 43 from Community Planning and Development Services is a request by Spurlick Consulting, Inc. for ZCO Incorporated and the Rapid City Elks for a preliminary subdivision plan for Lot 2 of Elks Golf Course subdivision, generally described as being located east of the Jolly Lane and Padre Drive intersection, and the recommendation is to approve with stipulations. I have a motion and a second for approval. All in favor of that motion say aye. Wait, okay, hold on, I'm sorry, I didn't see Lisa Modrick chime in. Let's go back to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. My trigger finger's not working as fast tonight. I just want to make sure before we go through with our vote, once again, this is another area that's developing. It's developing fast. There's quite a bit going on, and there has been some neighborhood concerns in that region there that there's some traffic issues, some roadway issues, some speed issues. So as we're developing, we need to make sure that those are in the stipulations, that we're reviewing that and updating those roads because the neighborhood is feeling the pressure of the development. And I wanted to speak on that, on the neighbors' behalf on that.
Okay, thank you. And just for formality's sake, let's have another motion to approve with stipulations. Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item 43 with stipulations. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. This takes us down to public hearing items, items 44 through 49. There are no speaker requests on those items, so we'll go to consent public hearing items, items 44 through 46. Would the council like to remove any of these items from consent, or if not, can we have a motion? So moved. Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve consent items 44 through 46. All in favor of that, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Now we're on to the non-consent public hearing items, items 47 through 49. And since they're ordinances, let's just go back to Alderman John Roberts. I think he likes reading these in anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. 47, second reading ordinance 6134, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by Dirk Jablonski, ACES for Mike Cole, Pennington County, for a rezoning from high-density residential district to public district for property generally described as being located at 718 4th Street, and I recommend approval.
Okay, a motion and a second to approve that item. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item, please.
48, second reading ordinance 6135, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by Dirk Jablonski, ACES for Mike Cole, Pennington County, for a rezoning from general commercial district to public district for property generally described as being located at 321 Kansas City Street, and I recommend approval.
Okay, a motion to approve and a second. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
49, a request by Fisk Land Surveying and Consulting Engineering Incorporated for Roger and Heidi Hanslick for a vacation of right-of-way for property generally described as being located at 4018 Kali Baja Street, and I recommend approval with stipulations.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval with stipulations. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 50 is the bill list, and we'll go to Finance Officer Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no additions to the bill list, so the total is that which is attached at $8,601,829.71.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the bill list. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay, now since we took 35 minutes doing all that, does the council wish a recess? Yes. Or just go right into it? Recess then? Okay, then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to skip the recess. We're going to stay in session here. And now we're going to open public comment on item number 51. And we have two speaker request forms. We'll start with Mr. Wilbur Holtz.
Good evening. I'm concerned that there seems to be a decrease in the library budget, in the city budget. I believe that our library is a valuable asset to the community. I have learned things at our library, such as President Teddy Roosevelt does not have a presidential library, but the holdings that he gathered as a youth, as a young man, throughout his life became the basis for the museum in New York City. I also learned Napoleon's buttons had too much tin in them, so they probably came open in that march to Russia because they were too brittle, thus losing that engagement. Fascinating things, wonderful things in our library. I go there a fair bit. It is used by all sorts of folks, provides all sorts of great services for our community, and I believe it was the wisdom of Thomas Jefferson that talked about a well-educated populace is essential for democracy. And so I would encourage support and strengthening this valuable institution of our community.
Thank you. And now Susan Bronstein.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make some comments about several areas of the budget that I'm very passionate about. I'm a retired librarian from the Rapid City Public Library. I worked there 28 years and feel like I made some small contribution over those years to all of the different programs and services that we've provided. And the library is a community gathering place. It's not just a place that holds computers or books or DVDs. It's a gathering place. There's hundreds of different people who come in and out every day. The people use our meeting rooms there. It's a very valuable resource for not only just Rapid City, but actually people from throughout the Black Hills, and many tourists come through and use the library as well. I'm also volunteer with the Dahl Arts Center and the Humane Society. So those are two other passions of mine. And I just want to express my support for those organizations. Everyone there works hard to, in one case, take care of animals, and the other case, provide incredible arts, different kinds of programs to the community, and they should all be cherished for that hard and important work. So if you can see fit to not cut their budgets, I think that would be a wonderful thing to do in the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now if it would please the council, before we read item number 51, I'd like to know if you'd want to open up for discussion on this item before we get a reading and a motion. I have also some questions and answers that I supplied the council with late this afternoon, early evening, and I'm prepared to read those and handle those at this time. We'll go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Since this is a continuation of the budget and the potentially the second and last reading by the City Council, I'd like to ask that we waive the 5-minute rule on speaker request.
Okay, that would be a motion to suspend the rules. Second. Okay, and a second. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Does the council want to impose any rules on itself pertaining to how many times a council member speak on one item or any of those other things? You could do that now if you wanted to. Okay. All right. How about we impose that rule at 10 o'clock then? So over the last week or so, I got written questions from Richie Nordstrom. And everything Richie wrote in his email couldn't be interpreted as a question. Some were comments. So I picked out the questions, and I believe I'm answering them all. Number one, can the city determine if the Humane Society has developed a fundraising plan similar to using local talent for raising funds from the Rapid City area? More specifically, for example, has a promo following the national ASPCA been employed by the Black Hills Humane Society? And my answer is the Humane Society does not appear to have an advertising campaign using local talent or celebrities for raising funds. I have personally spoken to them a number of different times about producing a television commercial, essentially copying the format used by the ASPCA and the National Humane Society. My suggestion was to draw attention to the local need and also deliver the message that funds given to the previously listed organizations do not go to serve and protect local pets and pet owners. I have a belief that ASPCA and National Humane Society commercials are very effective. The advertising budget for these agencies must be significant to have them played so often in cities such as Rapid City. The extent of my analysis in support of this belief is this: if their advertisements were not working, they would not be paying for airtime in local markets. After years of occasional discussion on this topic, I was finally advised in 2016 that the Humane Society of the Black Hills has priorities other than producing advertising. Question number two, can the city determine what percentage of the budget for the Humane Society is the city's portion? If the additional funding would be allocated from the city to the Humane Society at the level of what was suggested at the council meeting, what percentage of their budget would be the city's portion? In 2015, Humane Society budget was $936,646. The city's contribution was $278,314, or 30% of the Humane Society's budget. I am unaware of the total planned Humane Society budget for 2017, so I can't specifically answer the second part of that question. Question number three. The Humane Society receives funding from other sources. Can the city determine what the other sources are and how much the Humane Society receives? Then what percentage of the Humane Society budget would be from those other sources? And my answer, I'm unaware of the various funding sources. I am aware, however, that all of the proceeds from animal licensing goes to the Humane Society. Question number four, what percent of the Humane Society budget is being collected from fundraising? I am unable to answer that question. Question number five. The biggest item for me is the use of undesignated cash to balance the budget. If indeed we are using that much of the undesignated cash to balance the budget, the city should make efforts to turn that around. My answer is I agree. Since the council directs otherwise, I will make it a priority to reduce the use of undesignated cash to balance the budget by $1 million per year until none is used. I believe this can be accomplished barring any unforeseen financial crisis. Question number 6. Going down through the list of budget items, please reiterate the cost savings or offsets when hiring full-time employees, such as 2 public works engineering techs, that should be techs, the PD chemist, 2 new Parks and Rec employees, if Parks seasonal employees, etc. So here's a summary of the 2017 full-time employee requests. 3 ambulance employees for $150,000. This employee expense can be absorbed into the budget based on FTE vacancies for 2017 only. After that, the employee expense will be offset by billing customers for services rendered by these employees, as the ambulance operates as an enterprise fund. 3 water maintenance employees for $120,000. These employee expenses will be offset by reducing fees paid to private contractors. Recent analysis of water valve installation indicates the cost paid to private contractors averages $100 per hour per person for a valve installation. The estimate for performing the service with city employees is estimated to be $45 per hour per person, and these are inclusive. 1 budget analyst for the mayor's office for $68,000. There's no offsetting revenue for this expense. There may be cost savings from efficiencies, but I would not make that prediction at this point. 2 public works engineering technicians, $108,000. Public Works has conducted analysis and believes these positions will reduce consultant fees by approximately $400,000 annually. 2 police officers for $118,000 and 1 police chemist for $84,000, and I'm rounding, by the way. In 2017, there will be no offsetting revenue, but there will not be a budget increase either. These employees will be absorbed into the 2017 budget. In future years, there will be some offsetting revenue for the chemist, but that cannot accurately be estimated at this time. Parks and Recreation maintenance worker for $38,000 and a parks electrician for $47,000. There's no offsetting revenue for these personnel expenses. These positions are being justified on increased workload alone. Question number 7. Are fireworks a subsidy or an investment? In my opinion, fireworks are neither. It's merely an expense related to a service. And that's now under the Park and Rec budget. Question number 8. Can you provide an update on negotiations with the Humane Society? On March 9th, 2016, the Executive Director of the Humane Society sent an email saying they will be asking for a 5% increase in funding. On March 16th, 2016, the Humane Society provided a budget proposal for their 2017 fiscal year and asked for the same funding as 2016. After my initial budget presentation to the Council, the Humane Society Board met with the City Finance Officer and the City Attorney for their first negotiation session. At that time, they asked for a 15% increase in funding. I anticipate there will be more negotiation meetings, and an agreement will be reached prior to the end of 2016. Question number 9. For the surplus funds, undesignated, the remaining $1.76 million, is there a determination by rule, policy, or ordinance that has controls or limitations on that funding? My answer is no, not to my knowledge. So those are the written questions and answers. And I understand there was an email from Alderman Laurenti earlier this evening asking about the community investments line item and a summary of those, and that's been provided in hard copy to the council at this time. In addition to that, I have also handed out to council some additional information on the justification of full-time employees from the various departments, such as Parks and Rec, Public Works, the Rapid City Fire Department. And I also included the written justification from the Police Department. So, I believe that's all I have to offer at this moment. Next. Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to bring up the topic again that I discussed at the first budget hearing, and just would like my peers to consider a reduction of the 2017 budget, general fund budget of departments. And I'll state my reasons why again, although I said them last time. Number one, the mayor has indicated that this is a change year, that he is working towards priority-based budgets, and that the departments are currently looking at trying to go from a line item budget to a priority-based budget. And so this is going to be the year of finding out that information and trying to determine their priorities based on the program setting, not necessarily line items. The mayor's indicated that he's adding FTEs to the 2017 budget and that it will have no impact. That tells me that there is some wiggle room within the budgets. One of the questions I posed to the mayor and the city finance officer was, if the department director, once a budget is approved, can the department director move monies between the line items, which includes wages and benefits to equipment, to supplies, to, can they, so basically if they're approved a $5 million budget, it is the responsibility of that department director to manage that $5 million to the best of his or her ability. So they can move money between line items. So if they are looking at FTEs or if they are looking at supplies or equipment cost, they can move funds once the city council approves their budget. The finance officer also answered a question that was posed at the budget hearing last time. The question was phrased, I'm paraphrasing, such as, over the last few years, how often has the undesignated cash that's been locked up and tied to a budget actually been used in those budgets? And the finance officer's response was basically that generally the revenues have come in and the undesignated cash that was tied up for that budget was not generally used. That's why we have the undesignated balance that has increased over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 or 5. With these reasons is the reason that I want to propose that my peers consider taking a 6% reduction from the general fund departments. It includes the mayor's office and the city council's line item. I also recommend that we remove the $50,000 contingency fund, because we'll use undesignated cash if the city council has a need to approve any funds anyways. And the only line item that wasn't being touched when I looked at the mayor's presented budget was the subsidy in government buildings, because from what I could tell, those were all regulated by MOUs or agreements that were in place, and so those were already pretty much allocated. But the departments themselves, since they're in a period of change, I just think it may take more work on the city council's part, and it may take more work on the department director's part, because they're going to really need to be watching their budget as they're trying to put things into a priority-based budget. And I'm just asking them to come back to City Council and ask for the extra funds that they need, and the money is there. So with not locking up the $3.5 million in undesignated cash to balance this budget, it would actually free up that money for in case there is any other priority projects that come forward that the City Council would want to consider. The City Council members have long told the public that we are going to work on infrastructure and roads and potholes and streets, but we are always saying we need a revenue source, we need a revenue source. The city finance officer over years since I've been on City Council has often said, using undesignated cash, which is basically the balance in your checkbook, is not a good practice because it's not a revenue stream. So when you're trying to put out expenses for a city departments, you're actually using cash from your checkbook. So the next time you need to go to pay for something, it's no longer there once it's used. So if we lock up this $3.5 million and it does not need to be used by the city department directors, I just want my peers to realize that's $3.5 million that we're locking up again for 18 months, because it's only September now, and we will not be able to touch it because it is then designated as part of that budget. Mayor, I think that's all the comments I have at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to Jerry Wright.
Public Works Department for the repair of valves. Either way, it needs to be done. And I think that the estimate is about $8,800 or $9,000, and their numbers is $11,000 to contract. So I don't think the analysis was done very thoroughly, but I will support the additional personnel because I know they need it. So thank you.
Okay, now we'll go to Steve Laurenti.
Suspension of the rules. It was music to my ears. Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start first by addressing what was going to be one of the first things that I addressed as well, which was some of the data that I had asked for, which was the comparison of what we're paying today and what these new personnel will satisfy. Will there be a cost benefit for the taxpayer? Some of it is very good, and I appreciate the mayor coming back with some better responses to that. However, I guess what I really want to say at this point as we move, because I'm going to be here next year and the year after, is that the bar has to be set higher. And I think the mayor wants to set the bar higher, and I'm going to support him on that, because the fact of the matter is, when we're talking about just this water valve situation, there is a significant difference between $45 an hour for an employee and $100 an hour for a contract. However, what we don't know is how many contracts are done for water valves. What we do know is that a new employee is a fixed cost that's going to cost the general fund every year. It's a fixed cost, we know. So what we really need to know is how many contracts were put out last year or the year before. Because even though it's more than twice as much to contract it out, if we're not doing it often, we're going to be saving the taxpayers a lot of money by not having to pay for an employee, which will be a fixed cost every year in perpetuity. So that's where we need to get. We need that kind of data. We need something that says this is the X cost per year. We're going to have it every year because we have this data that says we've done this for the last 4 years, and this is why we need this employee. And this is the cost of this employee going into perpetuity. So we will be able to demonstrate to the taxpayers the cost benefit. That's the kind of data that we need. On the issue of what Amanda brought up, I'm hoping that we will, as a council tonight, have the courage to bring a motion forward so that it is on us as a council, the onus is on us, who are closest to the taxpayer, who will be brought supplementals to spend undesignated cash, and we will have the ability and the power and the fortitude to be able to decide whether this is a priority and undesignated cash really needs to be spent. I'm hoping that my colleagues will support this. It will put it in our laps, which is exactly where it belongs. It doesn't tie up directors because most of their budget by far is not undesignated cash. But when they do need to come and spend that one-time money, then we should be saying whether it reaches the level and the priority that the people need. The next thing that I would like to speak about is some of the information, and I want to clarify some of the information with the Humane Society, because I am the liaison for the Humane Society. Their budget proposal in March was a proposal of 3 or 4 different scenarios. They did not ask for the same amount of money that they received in FY16 because it's the same budgeted amount that they had back in 2013. They just got back to 2013's amount in FY16. So for them to ask for the same amount that they were receiving in 2013 for FY17 defies logic. So what they did propose in March, and I was there, is some different scenarios based on the amount that they received in FY16, because they were making comparisons to the cost and comparisons of services with Sioux Falls. So that is the reality there. And to answer some more questions there for some of my council, because of the fact that I am the liaison, if they have questions, I'm hoping I can answer those tonight, because I'm hoping an amendment to this budget will come forward that brings this a little bit closer to where their costs actually are. However, it will be still significantly lower than their actual costs to render those services to the city. But right now, they're projecting approximately $1 million in revenue for FY16. They don't have the final number yet. But that $1.1 million then would mean that about 47% of their work is for the city. Their budget with the city, however, is only 25.3% of their entire budget. So you can see there is a large gap between the cost of services to provide to the city and what they're actually receiving from the city. One other thing on the fundraising. I don't have those numbers. However, if you remember at the budget hearing, if you remember, I don't know, some of you may remember on the dais that I cut off Humane Society, because honestly, this is not about what they're fundraising. The fundraising is to support all of the other things that the Humane Society does. It is not to fund the animal control services. The animal control services is a contracted service with the city. So whatever they're fundraising is a bonus for the Humane Society, and in my own opinion, it is not honestly any of our business how they're fundraising, where they're fundraising, and when they're fundraising, because ultimately what we're debating is the cost of services and the contract that we are going to go into with the Humane Society. And again, I'll repeat that 47% of their projected budget will be the city's. That work will be 47%, and the $278,314 that is allocated to the Humane Society right now is 25.3% of that projected $1 million budget. And then I will come back again. Thank you.
Go to Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I have questions for several people, if I may, you being the first one.
Okay.
My understanding is there was no cut to the Humane Society budget, and I don't have your presentation in front of me. That is correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I thought I heard you say that we were still in negotiations with them, so although the budget's the budget, there may be something different coming forward at the end of that process?
There may. We've had one negotiation session which started after my initial budget proposal.
Okay, thank you. Question number two, I guess either you or Pauline could answer. Marion had commented on RSVP. That is still in the 2017 budget, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I think the confusion may be that it is on the list just to be looked at as far as how it's serving the community, if there's a better organization that can provide that service. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Question number three would be for Chief Jegris, if I may.
Yes.
Chief, could you tell us how a 6% just cut in your department would impact our community?
Well, when Mrs. Scott made that recommendation, I did some quick math here, and I think it would be about 9 or 10 staff members that we would be in a position that we would need to cut. And that would be devastating for our department and for the public safety of Rapid City.
I agree. And how would the up to 60-day approximate delay to come to us and request piece by piece some of that back affect your department?
You know, with a department as large as ours, things are moving very fluid. Our workload is different every day and every week, and you know, to compare it to, you know, for example, a factory that has a set output and can plan, that type of a budget scenario would seem to work for something like that. But for the type of work that we do in our community, I don't see how we could feasibly estimate 60 days in advance. I think that if you look at the history of our department and the fiscal responsibility that we've had as we've managed our budget, I think that you can see that we do things in a very efficient manner.
I would agree, and to piggyback on that, just the rise we're seeing in all of the things society doesn't want to face. In our community here in isolated Rapid City, it's happening, and I couldn't imagine having 9 to 10 fewer officers on the street. Question for Chief Malterburn, if I may. Same question, Chief. How would a 6% cut impact the fire department, as well as would it impact the recent grant that you were awarded?
Thank you, and I guess I would reiterate what Chief Degas is explaining in terms of the difficulty it would cause for our department. And I did the same thing. I was crunching some numbers, and exact number of employees would probably be pretty close to the amount of the grant that was just awarded. So it would kind of negate that whole process that we've been working towards for the last better than 2 years. So, I mean, that's a good indicator right there, and that we were just successful in clear justification to the federal government that we needed those employees, and then we would turn right around and reverse course, I guess. And so I'm thinking maybe that would jeopardize the award of that grant, and maybe quite possibly make us ineligible to accept it.
That was exactly the reason I asked the question. Okay. You know, and I just have to say, back when I've been on CIP now going into my 6th year, and I have seen when department directors would have to come to the table and elbow and posture and lobby and, you know, essentially beg for some of those dollars for things for their department. And we have come a long way from that type of environment. Mayor's taking it to the next level, and I would truly, truly, truly hate to see us go back to that, because it's going to be he who's quickest to the podium is going to get it, and that may not make sense with regard to the priority-based budgeting system that we're going into. So those are my comments for now. Thank you, Mayor.
I'd like to just clarify what I think I'm hearing from Alderwoman Scott, and that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but she's proposing to take the 6%, which is roughly the $3.5 million, out of the budget. And when the money starts running out for those departments that will see a negative impact from that, then some kind of a planned, almost preemptive supplemental would be prepared to put money back in the budget to carry through the rest of the budget year, or at least a portion of it. So, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why I think it's a second best idea, but I don't believe she's saying that we should cut this budget and lay off employees. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, we'll go to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start with the Humane Society. I studied what the March 16th proposal was, and there was actually, it was somewhat convoluted, actually. I could see why there was some discussion on that, but they had a Plan A, a Plan B, a Plan B1, a C, and a D. And the A, what said, maintain the same as we are. And that's what's in our budget right now is Plan A, which I would have to think that's their priority plan, was to just maintain, not lose any monies, but to actually match those funds or move that into the 2017 budget, which is what I feel we've done. I don't feel like we've reduced. I think we've actually met that proposal. And I'm confused as how we would go back and negotiate after we approve a budget and we put a number in there, and then we would come back and do an entirely new negotiation, and then does that open it up to all of our subsidies? Do we become a negotiation before March 31st? And that one I think I need to ask before I go on to my next question.
Okay, I can answer that to at least some extent. So the contract they're working under now is good through 2016. Then a new contract would be in order. So since we're just over halfway through 2016, And we're in the budget cycle. They've been put in for what I believe was their best proposal. And, but there are issues with the contract, things that they would like changed in the contract, and perhaps things we would like changed. And of course, the budgeted amount for 17 would be one of them that would be on the table. So once that is negotiated, if there were changes of any kind, the council's going to have to approve the contract between the Humane Society and the city. I trust that'll be before the beginning of 2017. So let's say an increase is added and it comes forward in November or December. I think then it would merely be up to finding where that additional money would be.
Thank you. Which could be an undesignated cash to move it into that subsidy. Okay. So then going into that area, on the 6% cut, which again, I cannot endorse a 6% cut on our departments. I've looked, I've read, I've talked to departments, I've gone through many of almost like a training session, and finding how many of them have been holding back to get their budgets back up. And I really feel like what we're looking at is reasonable options here in this budget. I don't believe that a 6% cut and then saying, but we'll write a blank check at the end or during our 2017 period, our budget period, is, to me, that's a blank check, and it's not a good backup. It's not a good responsible budgeting item. We should say this is the funds that we're working with, and then that gives the department the opportunity and the management to work from within those funds that we've approved in this budget for 2017, instead of slicing and dicing and then saying, oh, but don't worry, come on back to us because maybe you need more money in August. And I think that's just, it's just not good. It's not good city business to operate that way. If there was a need for a 6% cut, I think that would be something that we would be discussing. But an undesignated fund at this point, which is available, becomes a designated fund, and it becomes part of the budget. Our priority-based budgeting isn't being installed or integrated at this time. It's actually being used and being prepared, but it's not what we're using for 2017 budget. So we can't even use priority-based except as an example right now in our budgeting process of how we may look down the road. But today, what we're dealing with is a solid budget that has both a combination of automized and also submissions that brings our budget together, and without an increase in taxes, we meet the obligations, the needs, and the necessities of our community and our city and our department, so we can get some work done. I think a lot of us have been feeling like there's more work to be done, and if we are lacking the safety of our staff, or if we're lacking the work that we've got on some of these, we've got some contractors versus what we can do from within the city, I think we're going to be sending a great message to our taxpayers that we are doing it right, and we're doing it from within our sources and our resources. So it's, again, a budget that I support. I do not support a 6% cut. I think it's not necessary, and I think it's not sending the right message to our departments or to our community at a time when we really need to amp up and get the work done. And for now, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Darla Drew.
I'm not getting, oh, there we go. I feel that I can support Alderwoman Scott's proposal, and that might surprise some of you. But I do have a question for Amanda. So the FTEs, the new FTEs, are not included in what you're talking about, in the 6% cut?
In order to answer that, Darla, basically the mayor presented an overview budget. There was no line items or anything else. I'm not recommending changing anything that the mayor has already instituted into this budget. If he wants to add 15 FTEs in the various departments, that's fine. The reason I'm recommending the 6% cut by department is, again, it's up to the department director, the responsibility of the department director, to manage that budget. and move money between those line items. As you heard from Chief Multiverne and Chief Jegaris, they're concerned already trying to look at that reduction. Well, if they've got a good outline and they can show where their budget needs that, that's what I'm asking for all the department directors. That's easy enough for them to come right back to Legal and Finance and say, no, let me show you line item where this money needs to be. And this is where it's being spent, and this is what it's spent on, and this is the overtime, or this is the coverage, this is the, as Alderman Laurenti said during our last budget hearing, we're not unreasonable to pass what is needed. We're just asking, please explain to us why these funds are needed. And Alderwoman Drew, well, I'll answer your question. I hope that answered your question.
No, that did answer my question. And, what I like about this is that it gets rid of our favorites. And, I never hear from my constituents about more police protection or a better fire department. I hear them talking to me about infrastructure. Now, I know that might not seem fair because when we need a policeman, we need a policeman. When we need a fire department, we need the fire department. But there are certain groups that are always picked on in the budget, and I'm seeing that this is just an unfair way of doing things. I don't like having the culture and history attacked every time. I'd like to see everything more fair across the board. So that would be my feeling on why I could actually support the 6%. I think it would just make things, for me, more understandable. I'm not a budget genius. I don't go through everything because it's just not my deal. But when I look at a 6% overall cut, I understand that, and I think it's fair. A couple of things that stand out to me in the budget that I'd like to talk about just a little bit, and I know that I'm going to hit some sacred cows here, but that's okay with me. The $250,000 donation to the Cornerstone, or donation, whatever, funding for the Cornerstone Rescue Mission is a question for me. I have talked to some people that work in with the homeless population. They don't want it to be a growth industry, and it will grow to capacity of what will fund it. So maybe we need to reach out and work with the faith-based community, and as a group, work with them to find funding for the Cornerstone mission. It might not be our place to do that. Until we decide what we're going to do as far as building something for the homeless people, I'm just not sure the Cornerstone is the place where I want to see the money go at this point. The library, I saw the big cuts to the library, and I'm the liaison, so I'm going to play the Steve Laurenti card here. But this is not your mother's library. I heard people say that, why do we need a library when we have the internet? Well, the services there are very important to this community. I don't know if any of you council members have been to the library in the last year, but it's a service center in many ways. It's a community center. I went down there, I was there last week checking out a book. Every register that's checking out books or working with people was busy. Every computer was taken. There were people that were helping others look for references or whatever those materials might be. I went down to 2 presentations over the last 6 months with lectures. Each one of them had to bring out more chairs because the crowds were bigger than anticipated. So it's not like we're having less people use the library. And when I hear about the makerspace being irrelevant, I'm telling you that's what's coming for the future. And we've got to have a space for kids that don't have access to those kinds of things to find out. And, we talk about the School of Mines being part of our community. That's where it's going to be part of our community. If you don't know what a makerspace is, it's 3D printing, so that when you go to Kadoka in 50 years and you need a fan belt for whatever you're driving, they could probably produce one right there instead of you being stuck there until they can get one in. So, I'm saying there's so many uses for makerspace. It's incredible. And so if you can't see that part of our future, I'm sorry. but I think we need to keep the relevancy of the library, and this is what these guys are doing. We talk about other places being irrelevant. Oh, they haven't kept up with the times. And then we go around and criticize these guys for being ahead of the times. And I really, really support the library and the wonderful work you're doing to educate our community, because without an educated community, we don't have democracy. We don't have. Without literacy, we don't have the people that we need to fill the jobs and run this community. So I will defend your budget. I don't know if I'll be any good at it or if I'll get anything done for you, but I will defend it because I see what you're doing, and it's really, really important. Lastly, I've just got to hit on the Humane Society. And there are a lot of groups here, Alderman Laurenti, that provides services to the city, and they're not paid for them. The Rapid City Arts Council provided the cultural plan at $80,000 cost to them, and they gave it to the city. So not everyone expects to have everything covered, and I think you can raise money for animals. I really do, and I don't know what they're doing. I stepped up, I tried to help them with a documentarian who's had documentaries on Nova and Discovery, and I said, please help them make a nice ad. And he did, and he said they wanted to show how to process an animal, what it cost. And I talked to him again today, and I wanted to make sure that I'd heard this correctly. The board decided not to go through with this ad because they didn't want to make public their costs. That's fundraising 101. That's fundraising. You tell people what your costs are, and then you ask for money. And I am offended that they would not take this kind of help. And I am a fundraiser. I would fundraise for the Rapid City Arts Council. Okay, it's really hard to go and ask people to support an arts exhibit, as Pepper will attest to. I think puppies and kittens would be pretty easy ask. And if they could just get some PSAs out there, I think that they could cover whatever they want to cover as far as their expenses. 40% of the work they do is for the city. A lot of the people that work for the nonprofits in this town do work for the city, and they don't get any recompense from the city for it. They raise their own money. It's understood. Operations are covered by the nonprofit. And I know this because I come from that world. So that's the things I have to say about this budget. I know I get a little bit excited, but that's just my personality. And I think that we can come up with some cuts here that will cover other things. And I also can support Amanda Scott's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Jason Sullivan.
Thank you, Alderman Estes. Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question of the Finance Officer?
You suspended the rules, remember?
All right, thank you. Well, yeah.
We did.
Pauline, question. Sorry. Just a couple of points of clarification. The library budget, I only see a decrease of 0.79% overall. Is that right? We're not talking about a significant cut to the library budget?
In the 609 library budget, that is correct.
All right.
Which that is the main budget for the library. They also have a county library, and that's based off of what the overall budget is.
So we aren't talking about cutting significant library resources right now, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Just want to make sure I don't want to put fear into everybody saying we're cutting the library.
I do.
Okay, well, all right. Well,
if you
you're a
want
good
dollar
politician.
amount, I can give you that too.
Okay. Another question. Alderwoman Scott's remarks on undesignated cash. So since I haven't been here for the years that she's been here, and she says that you have mentioned the use of this and how it's an unhealthy practice. Is that true? Is that accurate? Can you fill me in as a new one?
Okay, so if you were to use undesignated cash for ongoing expenses all the time, it would diminish, obviously. You cannot, and this is, she referred to this before, you cannot use one-time money for ongoing expenses. Having said that, she also commented that she asked me about how many times have we actually used undesignated cash, and very, very few times have we actually used undesignated cash. And at the end of the day, we've used it to balance the budget, but at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we very rarely have actually dipped into that undesignated cash.
So do you think this is much ado, well, maybe much ado about nothing if we rarely do it, or?
I will tell you, after the recession hit in 2009, 2010,
yeah.
somewhere in there, budgets have gotten way tighter than they used to be. We used to use over $4 million of undesignated cash to balance the budget. Every year, that's what we would use. But we'd also get a lot of budget reverting back at the end of the year where it's unspent dollars, which means that money just accumulates in the fund if the revenues came in as projected. Budgets are getting tighter. The amount that's getting turned back in at the end of the year has gotten less. And so I wouldn't say it's much to do about nothing. It's always a concern of mine because I like to have a good cash flow and I like to have a good cash balance in case we do have another 2009, 2010 scenario. Would I like to see less used in the budget for 2017 to balance it? Absolutely. Do I think we need to drop it down to zero? No.
Thank you. That's got a few more eyes, but that's all for the finance officer. Couple of remarks I had on Humane Society. So Alderman Laurenti's done a good job pointing out that they're working on 2013. Their budget's based on kind of 2013 needs. And you have a lot of passion about that. And I wonder, it sounds to me, talking through to the city departments, that they're also working on not necessarily 2017 needs, but they're trying to get caught up because of the recession that Pauline just mentioned. Are we working from behind in the city as well? Because we're a growing community. Every year our community grows. That means every year the needs of our community grows. And so, one question I have is the same passion that we have for the Humane Society and their funding levels at 2013. I wonder if our police force or public works departments, are they operating with the same kind of scenario? And that's something I think we have to ask. Regarding the cuts, and I said this last time to Alderwoman Scott's proposal, but I'm not sure all cuts are created equal. I just don't like the idea of 6% public works, 6% police force, 6% fire. I think there would have to be more study into that if we were to make it happen. And, in terms of going back to the Humane Society, Alderwoman Drew brought up an interesting story about some help that she proposed. And something I guess I would encourage as we go through the negotiations with the Humane Society is to look at performance measures as we are entering negotiations. So, and this is true of anybody, but if we're saying you're going to offer this service for us, we should have some sort of expectation in writing of what that service is we're getting. Not just what you're going to do, but are you going to call people back? Are you going to be open with your fundraising, those sorts of things. So I think that kind of accountability and transparency of organizations that we help, we should expect that from them. They should expect it from us. So those are a few items just to think about. If the library was getting cut significantly, I would have been upset about it. It doesn't look like a significant decrease at this time. So until we have something to worry about, I don't want to worry about that. Humane Society, I'm not for cutting the Humane Society at all, but I think we need to fund them appropriately, have expectations for them. I want to see that same fire and passion for the people that work for our city, who serve our city well. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a little sidebar in front of me, so I appreciate your patience. Darla Drew said that we were going to be surprised about her comments coming forward, and that reminds me of a drummer that works for Dee Dee and the Pharaohs. He's got this pair of eyeglasses. That's how surprised I was at seeing her comments coming forward on how surprised I was. So I was going to ask the Finance Department a question, but if I can go switch to the library for a question, may I? Jim McShane, please, if you could come to the podium.
Good evening.
Mr. McShane, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for this opportunity to bring this question forward to you. You're going through an evaluation after the sometime between now and the end of the year. Am I understanding that correctly?
You mean the mayor's?
The mayor's evaluation
That's
committee.
my understanding, yes.
So I'm trying to imagine this scenario here. If we do that 6% budget cut, number one, you would have to be going through an evaluation with them, that group, and then coming back to the city council to do another, basically an evaluation. Do you agree with me that that would be the potential scenario?
Well, sure. We would have to justify whatever monies we were short to this group as well, yes.
Thank you. And then, just in general terms, how long have we, as a council, how long, have you been here long enough to tell us approximately how long you've been in front of the council to make a presentation about your budget?
Well, I suppose I do it every year.
Yes.
Except for this year. And
Correct.
I've only been here 3 years.
Okay. How many minutes did we give you during those timeframes?
Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this, thank you, Jim, and that's all I need at this point. Where I'm going with this is that if we go through this procedure of doing the 6% across the board cut, is that there's other factors to be considered, such as the library department going through basically 2 evaluations, one in front of us and another one in front of the evaluation committee that the mayor proposes. And if I can go to the finance department next for a question. Pauline, if you can follow my line of thinking here on the scenarios that you would be going through for making another evaluation, if you will, and justifying why you need your current budget versus the 6% cut. Approximately how long in the past have we given you time to make a presentation to us in front of the council?
My budget doesn't typically change a whole lot from year to year. Most of it is salaries. I think the only thing different for the 2017 budget is I asked for $25,000 to do some aesthetics in my office because the carpet is coming up by the squares and it's original to the building. So as far as I'm concerned, when I sit there and look at it, it could be a shell game if I didn't want to cut employees, because most of my budget is employees. That's what we do. We don't provide have the big equipment purchases or anything, or we're required by law to do it, like the publications and the elections and that type of thing. So, and our audits. Those are my big dollar amount items: people, audit, election, publication. Other than that, you're going to be taking a little bit here and there from travel and training. You're going to be taking a little bit from supplies. For 2017, you would take away the carpet money, because I would do everything I could to not lose my employees.
Thank you, Pauline. I appreciate that. Essentially what I'm trying to imagine is the scenario that we would be going through for allowing the department heads to come back in front of us. And we've got 10 different departments within the city. And if we gave them enough time to come back in front of us, that's, and somebody help me out with the entire math here, if we gave them 15 minutes, that'd be 150 minutes we'd have to spend with the department heads in front of us. I'm sorry?
That's 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours that we would have to be spending on that. And just talking to the department heads, and so they can have their basis for keeping their current funding rate in front of us. That's a lot of time that we have to get done between now and the 1st of October to get this budget presentation and adopted in that point. So I appreciate Alderwoman Scott version 2, and that's my version 2.0 as far as the 6% reduction to the budgets, and that is not including all the arts and culture that we have to contend with as well, which I would suspect we'd have to have them in front of us for another 15 minutes each, if we could give that much time for each one of them, for those investments that we have to do within the city. Alderman Laurenti brought up a good question about the valves within the city that are having to be repaired or fixed within by contractors, and the justification that we had for the different employees if we did it in-house. Well, I haven't got a total count, and if the Public Works Director was here tonight, I could give you a little better close count on how many valves we have in the city. But we've really had 2 high-profile cases on valves that need to be fixed within the city. That's the only ones that I'm aware of that made the newspaper or the news media. We've got lots of other valves out there, and I'm going to say in the hundreds, if not 1,000 valves that have to be monitored, maintained, and ongoing maintenance for it. So the justification for the additional employees makes sense to me. I'm also a liaison for the RSVP group, and what Marianne brought in front of us beforehand makes perfectly good sense. There is another alternative service out there, but to the degree or the level of service that the alternative service provides compared to RSVP, and again, this will be in front of the evaluation committee, so they can present their case on their behalf much better than I can in front of the council, is that the RSVP does an excellent job, what they do and how they provide activities for our senior citizens plus. And the plus means the people that are less than 65 years old, of age. As Marianne suggested, that there is at least 600 people out there in the public that do take or do provide a volunteer service within the city. The other agency that I represent, that it's, and I don't know how the mayor picked me as being lucky for being two of my agencies being on the evaluation list, but another one is the Journey Museum, and again, being the liaison for that organization. They, again, will be able to provide better answers than I can articulate here to the evaluation committee, but they are doing pretty much everything that you've been asking of them. Just because of the funding costs that they have to go through is probably the major holdup or the reason why they cannot do everything that they would like to do. And without that funding source, they would have to do some other alternative considerations for that agency. I believe that I'm going to quit here because I think I've stated all of my arguments here at this point. So again, I thank the drummer for the Dee Dee and the Pharaohs for giving me that nice surprise that look. So thank you. I'll yield.
Point of clarification for the council. When you suspended the rules, I assumed, because this is what the motion means, that the rules are suspended. So do you want me to handle the speakers in order, or those who haven't spoken first in a higher priority, or does it make any difference to you?
Those who haven't spoken.
Any
matter.
Okay. Well, let's go to Jerry Wright then, since he hasn't spoken.
Well, I did, but I think I was one of the first, so Thank you.
Oh.
You just forgot.
About a lonely valve, about estimates and costs, and whoa. I'm going to make a motion, if I hopefully can have a second. I'd like to retain the floor, and that is that we approve the second reading of this ordinance.
Second.
Thank you. What I'd like to say is that I think we're going through a little of the night before the wedding jitters. Sort of. And we're going through a little bit of working the issue. Essentially, we should have done a month or two ago. The mayor and his staff have put together a budget. There's not a significant change in anything that I am aware of. And I think that the departments and he have done a good job, and they think we've had adequate time to chime in. Sorry, I missed a couple of the shows, but that couldn't be helped. So I asked the council to support the mayor and his budget, and if we want to work on this, let's start on the 2018 tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the second reading, and we have a list of folks. Oh, John Roberts.
I'm not sure I like the way the mayor said my name. But anyway, I wish I had been at the first reading of the budget. Unfortunately, I was sick and I had the flu. If I had to do it over again, you'd all have the flu too, because I just wanted to keep you from getting sick. There's a lot of things in this budget that I find that are done well. I think the mayor made some good decisions. I think he made some difficult decisions. I think there's some other things in this budget that aren't quite as well. I know that, as the city increases in size and as animal control becomes kind of out of hand, I see it quite regularly in my ward. We have a lot of stray animals in my ward, and it becomes kind of problematic. I would like to see some kind of an increase in their budget, and I know we've talked about that for years. Another one is the discussion that we're having up here over the Humane Society and the way they do their marketing. I remember having the exact same conversation 3 years ago about the Journey. So, this isn't like it's a new concept. We've been asking different entities to do this for a long time, and the only way I think that we're going to get them to do it is either to step in and help them and force them into our help, or cut their budgets, and I really don't recommend that in Humane Society, but I know that we've been talking about that with a few. And leading off of that, Mr. Wright said there's no real big changes. Well, there's one big change right here on the dais, the 26.5% increase to the general fund community investments. And Councilwoman Drew was speaking a little bit earlier about the $250,000 to the Cornerstone Rescue Mission. And that's going to be my sticking point unless we can find a way to take it out of the budget as far as me voting for this budget. I do not believe that the city of Rapid City should put that into the general fund budget. I do believe that the Cornerstone needs the money. I know they lost $400,000 because of the VA pulling out of their funding from them. But once we put it in the general fund, we're going to be 3 or 4 years down the line doing the same thing that we're doing every year with the Journey, saying we're giving them too much money. We shouldn't be giving them this money. Once we put that into the general fund budget, they're going to be expecting it every year, and it's going to be difficult for us to pull it out of there. I would support giving them that money out of the Vision Fund. I believe that's where they should have went to ask for the money. I don't think this is one thing that should be in the general fund. I think there's a few other things that shouldn't be in the general fund that should have went through the Vision Fund. I won't go through that. It's not going to make a lot of difference what I say here up on the dais. I know I don't have support to get it done anyway. I just want to bring it forward that, as we start adding these things to the general fund, that puts more pressure on the taxpayers, more burden on property tax. We're looking at, I think we're going to see not a huge increase in sales tax this year. If you look at the numbers through, the first 6 or 7 months, and I had a real interesting conversation the other day with one of the business owners of one of the larger bars in Sturgis about the last Sturgis rally. He was 48% down from last year. I think we're going to see our sales tax start to level off, and I think that we really need to look at putting as much money and keeping as much money as we can in the bank. I do like Amanda Scott's idea. Is it radical? Kind of. Is this going to cause this huge problem where people come in and we take hours and hours to talk to departments? Oh my God, I don't know how we did it for years. That's how we did it every single year. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's what Alderwoman Scott is talking about. She's talking about making a cut when they come back in 3 months, 6 months, however long it's going to take before they need their money. It's just going to make the departments justify what they need the money for. And then we'll do a supplemental appropriation. We do them anyway throughout the year. I don't think it's a blank check. I don't think that we're giving anybody anything. I think that it's just we're making people more accountable for the way that the money is being spent. And I know that, you know, you can come across as the doom and gloom. We're going to have to cut 9 employees here and we're going to have to cut 10 employees here. We're not going to. We're not saying we're going to take that money away from you. We're just saying we're going to make you justify spending that money. So anyway, I will support that if that comes forward from Ms. Scott. I wish that somebody would come forward and at least make a motion to take the $250,000 out of there. If not, at least put a 1-year provision on it, and then let's talk about the vision fund for it next year. But I'm just worried once it goes into the general fund, it's going to be there forever. So, thank you.
Okay, Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. I make an amendment to the motion to include a 15% increase for the Humane Society, if I can get a second on that. Thank you. The reason I bring this forward is because of some of the things that I've said. If there are questions, again, about some of the specifics about the Humane Society, and what this 15% increase will do is bring the Humane Society's budget up to 2016. So they still will not be back to where they need to be. To Alderman Solomon's comments, and I appreciate those. One of the things that I've always prided myself on was always looking out for public safety first with our city's budget, and I believe that the Humane Society is an integral part of that. I've always believed that. In fact, because of the fact that Sioux Falls uses it's part of the police department's budget to provide that service. They have officers who go do these calls. I would prefer officers, and I know that our chief has spoke before, and even our chief before, who is now the mayor, about the service that they provide, and they don't want officers doing those calls. And honestly, it can't be done at a better cost than what we are, even with this 15% increase, providing that to them so that they can do this service even better, because there are some significant costs involved with that facility, which if you looked at some of the handout, the facility is a large part of that. It's an old building. They are actually applying in the vision funds, so they are going that route. Hopefully they'll be one of the ones that will get granted vision funds to help improve their facility, and so maybe there will be efficiency savings for them in the future. But this 15% increase is greatly needed because it is a public safety issue. If our police force, just for all of you to ponder, if our police force, and it was part of the police force's department, would we question their fundraising ability to serve, to do the animal control services for the city? No, we would not ask that question. We would just fund it because it needs to be done. It's a public safety factor. It has nothing to do with fundraising. It has to do with public safety. And so I'm hoping that my colleagues will support the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I have a suggestion. You can take it or leave it. But we have 6 people waiting to speak. And now we have our first amendment to the motion. And if it may keep things a little more on track if we are able to vote on the amendment or the amended motion. And so if so you could limit, if you wanted to limit your conversation to that amendment, we could get this under vote quicker. You guys suspended the rules, so that's just a suggestion. What would the council like to do?
Just go down the list and see who wants to talk about the amendment.
Charity Doyle on the amendment?
Yes, sir. We said earlier that you are currently in negotiations with the Humane Society, and I hope the rest of the community subsidies are listening up, because if this 15% amendment passes, then you now know all you need to do is get your liaison up here to come in and circumvent the entire process. Go for it.
Jason Solomon on the amendment?
Yeah, actually, same kind of point. Here's my one question is, if they're in negotiations, couldn't they just get this through the negotiation process anyways? Do they really, I mean, we can approve a certain percentage here, but they're in negotiations anyways, and we're gonna approve probably whatever the city decides. So could that be part of the negotiation with them? That's my only fear. I'm for, and I think Alderman Laurenti knows, I'm pro Humane Society, but there's a negotiation process, and I think that's where Alderwoman Doyle was kind of getting at, is to let that process play out, because we're gonna, if the city comes to an agreement with the Humane Society, I can't imagine we're not approving that. And if they get 15% through the negotiation process versus us just deciding that right here and right now, it seems like a better way, since they're already in that discussion. And so those are my remarks on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, Richie Nordstrom on the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just scrambling to find out the fundings, how much we're going to do there. But if I understand the numbers correctly, that we'll be spending more money on the Humane Society than we will be for the Cornerstone Rescue Mission. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, we already do.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that we'll be spending more money on animals than we are for people. Thank you.
Yeah. Darla Drew on the Humane Society amendment. Oh. Comments on the Humane Society amendment to add 15% to the Humane Society?
I don't have any heartburn over that. I guess I could go with that. It's just that I'd really like them to take more responsibility for raising the money, because it's not that much money. Thank you.
Lisa Modrick on the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. 15% on the Humane Society, while we are considering cutting 6% out of our other public safety, which is police and fire, doesn't balance to me. I cannot be in favor of 15% on the Humane Society while we've got discussion about 6% cuts.
Okay,
out of order. But stated anyway.
John Roberts.
And we are only speaking on the motion on the 15%?
Yeah, on the amendment.
On the amendment. I wish Mr. Laurenti would ask for a little bit less. 15% is a pretty big increase. You know, I know that we've held them at a funding level, a low funding level for a long time. I do want to see them increased. The problem with it is the problem that we are in negotiations with them right now. The one thing that I do hope with these negotiations is we can get them into a budgetary cycle so they fall within what we do and the way that we spend and account for our money. So instead of putting them on a yearly, put them on a middle of the year cycle so we could actually budget a little easier for them, or do it a little further ahead of time. I will support it. It isn't that big of an amount of money. There are a lot of places that we could switch it around, or we could just use a few $1,000s more out of undesignated cash. Thank you.
Steve Laurenti on the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the comments. I just wanted to say that, again, the 15% gets them up to approximately 2016 for their operating budget of 2017. And I appreciate the comments by Alderman Roberts as well. For me, again, like I said, this is more of a public safety. This is not about animals. These animals interact with human beings almost in every one of these calls. So this is not about choosing animals over human beings, because if that were the case, I'd say take them to 0. So this is not about animals versus human beings, because every one of those calls that goes to the Humane Society is interaction with people and animals and protecting people. So I just want to clear that. Thank you.
You know, since in the last budget hearing that we had, some things were said during the Humane Society discussion, and I stayed quiet about it. I thought this is the council's budget hearing. I really shouldn't butt in, should let the council talk freely, and so I stayed quiet about that, and that ended up creating what I believe is a false narrative in the community. The false narrative is that the Humane Society budget has been cut, and that has never been the case. There were other remarks made about how we added an additional $80-some thousand in subsidies to the golf course. That's also incorrect. The Meadowbrook Golf Course, for the first time that I know of, came within $2,000 of paying all its bills from user fees. But there's no subsidy for Meadowbrook. There's an agreement with the LaCroix Links Golf Course that is leased and run by a nonprofit organization, and the agreement we have with them is essentially that the city pays for the first $25,000 in water for LaCroix. Everything else is covered by the nonprofit. So you could consider that a subsidy, but that's city parkland anyway. It's true that the Sioux Falls Police handle the animal control function. It's handled out of their special operations group. But they are not police officers assigned to go to animal calls. They are civilian, non-sworn animal control officers, same as we have here in Rapid City. They work for the Special Operations Group. The Special Operations Group also handles all of the event security and the parades, the escorts, all of the unusual things that don't fall into the standard job description of being a police officer. I've spoken at length with the Sioux Falls Police Department personally about this. I understand their operation. So there is expense to providing animal control. I'm going to tell you that I've been dragged into this, what has turned into an ugly situation with the Humane Society. It started when the previous mayor appointed me, then police chief, to be the chief negotiator for the Humane Society contract. Why would he do that? I don't know, but I accepted it because I was asked to do it. And in my negotiations, the subject of fundraising came up. I was aware at that time of how much fundraising was going on and what type of fundraising efforts were going on. And it was insufficient. The only city ordinance on the books that puts money directly into the pocket of a nonprofit is the animal licensing ordinance. They receive all of the revenue from the licensing fees of, I forget what it is, $19 for dogs and something for cats. And there was a broken relationship between the Humane Society and the local veterinary association. So I took it upon myself to go to the vets to try to mend some fence. And several of them agreed to start charging the licensing fee at the time that service is provided to the animals and forward those costs onto the Humane Society. My belief, and I was very upfront about it, was that if we can get the Humane Society raising a larger portion of their funds, we can reduce the city funds, because I have always believed we are overpaying for this service compared to other compared to other cities. So I guess my sin was being vocal about it. I brought it up and immediately was cast as an animal hater. And now, we can, I haven't said a thing during these budget hearings or the budget presentation that would disparage anybody. Yet we have this Humane Society being cut out in the community, and I'm getting emails and phone calls from people angry that the Humane Society is being cut. Well, I'm holding this up right here in black and white. Anybody can have it who wants it. This is the Humane Society of the Black Hills fiscal year 2017 budget proposal. They are proposing a budget. They have budget proposals A through D. A provides them with the largest funds of all of the proposals. I gave them proposal A. And now I'm being told, and we're all being told, that that's not what they asked for. It was not until I presented this to the city council that afterwards they came and asked for 15%. And that's the amendment we're going to vote on in a minute, if they need 15%.
You want to talk to me?
They asked for the same funding as 2016. I'll make a copy of this for anyone who wants it. The media has it. There's been no reporting on that fact, though. So, I am well aware of what's going on with the Humane Society, and I will take responsibility for the failed communication. I worked for a police agency that every 3 years, every single work group in that agency goes under evaluation. Every 3 years. The only exception is when there's a perceived problem in that agency, and then it's sooner than 3 years. So when I came here as mayor, an evaluation's not a dirty word. An evaluation doesn't mean you're on the chopping block. I was very honest about why we're evaluating these agencies. It's because we don't understand them. We don't understand their mission. We don't know if we have a good relationship. We need to believe what they believe. Period. We are seeking to get on the same page as these organizations, Humane Society being one of them. It's not a chopping block. So, thanks for suspending the rules. That goes both ways. I just had to say that because I feel incompetent for not saying something at the last budget hearing. I went home feeling like a fool, and I felt even worse about it when I started getting a bad time for slashing the Humane Society budget. So I apologize for that. Told myself I wasn't going to sit around and have that message missed a second time. And so there you have it. The motion on the table, as I see it, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the way I see it, is the approval of the 2016 budget with the amendment to add 15% to the Humane Society. Am I correct, or are we only voting on just the amendment? Okay. So let's vote on that amendment then. The amendment on the table is to add 15% to the Humane Society budget. All in favor of adding 15%, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Here.
Doyle. Estes. Scott. Laurenti. Wright. Modrick. Roberts. Nordstrom. Drew. Solomon. Motion fails 7-3.
Okay. You reading it? Go to Charity Doyle.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the 2017 budget for the SAFER grant that was awarded the fire department in the amount of $529,371 with a funding source of intergovernmental revenue.
Second. Dollar amount one more time?
$529,371. And this is just for 2017's portion of that grant.
Comments on that? Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. And the reason this amendment is being made is that this is needed in order to accept the grant, or I'm trying to understand why this amendment is being made.
I can answer that because the SAFER grant is going to pay the city of Rapid City, but we in turn are going to pay for the new fire employees, and that's going to show as an expense. So the expense has to be accounted for in the budget, am I correct? It'll show up on the revenue side, but not on the expense side if we don't change it. No real change to the budget. More money going in, more revenue, and more expense in the same amount.
If I might, if you don't include it now, you're just going to have to do a supplement later, so it's easier just to include it now. And then the discussion with the fire department is they'll include the 2018 numbers as part of their budget that is presented to the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this amendment on the table is to add 500. Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. On the amendment, if you will, if I can ask the finance officer a question. I think there was a couple of us that wanted to get an answer, if I could.
Of course.
Thank you. On the, for this grant, that amount, is it budgeted? Not budgeted, of course, but is it undesignated cash?
No, with the amendment that Ms. Doyle made, the funding source is intergovernmental revenue, which would be the grant dollars. So there's a net effect of zero.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, so the motion, the amended motion on the table is to add $529,371 to the fire department budget due to the SAFER grant award. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Okay. We'll go to Lisa Modrick. Okay, is there any objection to calling the question on the original motion then?
Yes.
Okay. Now what do I do? Okay, let's take a vote on calling the question. Who wants to call the question, say aye.
Aye.
Who doesn't want to call the question, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I think it's about a tie, but okay, we'll go to. Well, there's no speaker lights, so don't want to call the question, but you don't want to talk either. So, Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Since I've been doing all the talking on my 6% reduction, I'd like to go ahead and make that amendment to the motion on the floor.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
And I'd like to clarify the motion.
Please do.
The motion is to reduce the general fund budget as presented by the mayor by departments by 6%, except the subsidies and buildings portion, because that was based on MOUs and contracted agreements, and then also to reduce or remove the council contingency of $50,000. If that's okay with the seconder?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll go to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. So once again, we've layered a 6% of a flat cut to all departments without any reasoning behind a flat cut to all departments. There's no explanation with all the information that we've received over the last several weeks. It's not like we received this budget yesterday. We've been looking over this budget now for weeks, in fine-tune as well as line item based. And by slicing and dicing, if we go with a 6% cut across the board, it doesn't seem like we're designating why we're going to cut 6% and where we're going to cut 6%. Are we just going to let 6% sit back in the bank while we allow the departments to perhaps struggle another year as they've been trying to build their departments back up so that they can keep up with the growth? I mean, look at our permits. Look at the things that we're approving as we go through our public works and our legal and finance. We're approving growth and development like crazy right now. This is a great time for Rapid City, but we're going to hold back our departments while we put the strain of our growth before our the business of our city. And we are operating this as a business. So if a business went out there and slashed 6% without a designated reason why, it probably would not do very well that year as it's working out of its budget. So then is it fair then to go with our departments that we trust fully with the amounts that we designate to them and do this and not believe that the things that they've given the mayor over the last 6 months are the reasons why they need this budget, and then all the documentation that we've received that justifies that, is it truly fair to them to just pick a number? And why didn't we pick 8%? Why didn't we pick 10%? And then the next question I have with that is, if we are at 6% slash, then why would we slash our departments but maybe not reconsider the entire budget in itself? And then we're slashing the subsidies that we want to protect. So I have a problem with the 6%. I think it's the wrong way to go. I think it's the wrong move for the community and the wrong move for the city, and I think it's just bad business. And I would be sorry to see that this motion would move. And if it does, it may be moving with our community investments also seeing a slash and gash. And up here, we don't want to see that happen either. So I would be careful what we wish for.
Jerry Wright.
I can't think of anything more preposterous than to suggest a 6% cut across at this time, at the 11th hour and 59th minute before we're supposed to be done with this. We are doing to ourselves much as the national and international economy did in 2000 and 2008 to us at their choosing and at our loss. And our city suffered, our department suffered, we lost replacement of equipment, personnel and training, and on and on. And we worked for 8-10 years to get back to where we are. And we're going to do it on choice. Why wasn't this brought to us 4 or 5 months ago before the council? And why didn't the council direct, if that's the way the council wanted to do it, manage the departments by telling them what they're going to do? We could have just simply said, your budget is 6% less than it was last year, period. We'll see you in September. That's not good management. Not good management at all. We have heard from our fire department, police department, they need to do what they need to do. We've heard Parks Department, they're short, they need an electrician. We hear about the Streets Department need to pick valves, and on and on and on. The city is growing. Why in God's green earth would we do a self-inflicted gunshot on ourselves? I don't know. I will not support this. And I do again ask that the council vote to approve the budget as prepared by the mayor and his staff over 6 months professionally. Thank you. I will not support this amendment.
Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things that I've learned over the years with regard to the budget process. And I spoke to it a little bit at last budget hearing, and that was what happens when sales tax dollars come in over and above what was projected. And there's a process that the city goes through. Finance department will send it out to the departments and say, hey, we have this extra, and they go through a process that can take up 45 to 60 days to figure out where that's going to go, where it's most needed, and quite honestly, who's attentive and responsive to those requests. So that undesignated cash that's coming in is getting added to the budget, and that's what you see if any of you have had the stomach to go through the supplemental appropriations throughout the year. That's what you would see. So what we're here discussing is whether to do this same, or the opposite of that, to just not give it on the front end and do it on the back end when we're going to, traditionally, we're going to do it anyway. It's going to go anyway. But I wanted to talk about a little process, something else that I learned called reversion. So departments throughout the year, general fund departments, don't get to keep anything they don't spend. In fact, I remember Mayor Allender, that was then Chief Allender, would make a little contest out of it with the police department, and he'd set his budget, and he'd fine-tune everything, and then just to challenge himself would see how much he could still cut out of that and turn back, and he did it every year. He would send money back to the city for the city to then reallocate elsewhere. So when we talk about reversion, keep that in mind, because there's not a little pot of money for these departments to fall back on to pay their employees. And when we talk about 6% or 3% or anything else, we have 788 city employees. A lot of you are sitting out here right now. So do the math. It's a lot of people. What is it? 47 people? Potential, and I'm not trying to promote doom and gloom. Like Pauline said earlier, chances are all the other things would not happen. The potholes wouldn't get filled. The new equipment wouldn't get purchased. Police officers would continue to drive cars that are falling apart. So that's what would happen. Or they'd have to cut personnel. Something would have to happen before they could come back to us and request the money that is sitting there anyway, and that we would give them throughout the year as that money comes in. So I just want you to understand the process, that I think there are more implications. And I agree with, I'll echo, I don't remember who voiced it, but I've always really, really, really appreciated Alderwoman Scott's eye to detail and what she brings to the council. I think we need more like her. What I will say, though, is that this type of decision at this stage in the process, I believe, is dangerous territory. Here's the other thing I know. When Mayor Allender came into office and started working with the budget, it was something that I hadn't seen before. It was, instead of just taking staff's wishes and what he was handed to by staff, he actually sequestered himself in his office for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and dug in and made each one of those things justified. Department directors already had to go through the deal and justify the things that they were requesting. So he has the confidence in what he presented to us, and really it boils down to, are we going to trust that? Because he did the work. He did the work. He put in the time. He learned what was going on. He learned what was needed. And I also want to remind the council that the budget needs to be ratified by the end of this month. Is that correct? I believe by October 1, pretty sure. And again, this is without any tax increases. So it's not insult to injury. It's money that we were blessed with to come in over and above projections. We have this discussion in CIP every single month about getting those dollars out to work in the community rather than sitting in a bank somewhere. And if we hold it back, I don't care what the percentage is, but if we hold it back right now, it's sitting in a fund, not working for the taxpayer. And I think I will finally shut up for the rest of the night. Thank you.
Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. First, one thing, and then two other things. First, I'm amazed that some of the words that are coming from some of my colleagues, it's entertaining, honestly. I mean, if you've been here for more than a year, this is when we do the things we're doing. During the budget hearings, this is when we do it. The budget is not completed because it's been presented to the council. That's when it begins for the council. There may be some things that you give to the mayor prior to him finishing, and he'll include them, or he won't include them, or he'll do something a little bit different. But the fact of the matter is, that's what the budget hearings are for. So this is what we do. This is when, I can remember many budget hearings where we entertained 6, 7, 8, 9 amendments during budget hearings. So This is very tame, but this is our job. So now the two things about the proposal here on the 6%. If you remember the finance officer saying the revenues almost always come in. We rarely will end up spending all of that undesignated cash that's budgeted. The revenue comes in. So there isn't this terrifying 6% across the board cut that's going to happen. And the other thing that was said tonight is that departments are not equal. That is absolutely correct. There are departments who will, if they need to come back for a supplemental and need undesignated cash, for example, public safety parts of our city, we will undoubtedly and unanimously approve those supplementals spending that undesignated cash. The sky is not falling. The revenues will most likely come in, and we will make sure that the city delivers what it's supposed to its citizens from a public safety standpoint, to a service standpoint. So this makes absolute sense. We should not fear this proposal. We should welcome this proposal, and I honestly believe that it's something that the mayor will be able to use next year, because I believe it's one of the things that he wants to work towards as well, which was one of his charts about us using more and more and more of the undesignated cash. So this will be a learning year. So not only for the priority-based budgeting, but for the fact that we can do this. There's nothing to fear here. Public safety will be met. Services will be rendered to every citizen who needs and demands those. So I would like my colleagues to just ponder those things. This is not going to be every department coming to us with thousands of supplementals and us spending hours upon hours, because number one, the revenues generally come in and cover the undesignated cash that is budgeted, and number two, departments are not equal, and we will make sure that public safety measures are funded properly if the revenues don't come in. I yield.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question would just be directed at you, Mayor, concerning this amendment. You know, you could have made this so much easier if you'd projected more revenue coming in. Then we wouldn't be considering a 6% reduction to offset the undesignated cash. So I just wanted to bring that up, is that there's two aspects to this, revenue and expenses. What was presented to the City Council was the revenue. I don't think it is fair for us to second guess the projections on property taxes, permits and fees, and the sales tax. In my opinion, they probably will come in higher. That's what my projection predicts. But the only other aspect the City Council has to look at are the expense side. So that's why I'm proposing this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up that 2 points of two distinct sides of the budget, the expenses and the revenue, and this council in this budget process is largely focused on the expenses. We have too few people focusing on the revenue, in my opinion. And the revenue, I'm not talking about raising taxes or things of that nature. What I'm talking about is doing things that promote our city. And whether it's streamlining or whether it's working with the chamber or business owners or whatever the method may be, we have a legitimate concern to watch out for the revenue streams in this city. Otherwise, the expenses, this just becomes an academic exercise of balancing numbers. The expenses are a real concern. So one speaker on the waiting list now, Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will not be supporting the 6% amendment, and basically what I don't want to do is I don't want to look our police chief and fire chief and our library directors and say, we're going to cut by 6%, not because we're in trouble, but because for a variety of other reasons. We're not raising taxes this year. We just talked about the revenue coming in, and we're trying to get up to speed in a growing community. And what you're seeing here are growing pains. We have a growing, vibrant community, a lot of wonderful things happening, and we're trying to make sure that we do so with a balanced budget, which we are. Those are all things I think we all can agree on. These are fundamental aspects of budgeting. So we have a balanced budget. We have no tax increases this year for the CPI. So we have $160 million in order to make our city the best city it can possibly be. For months, the mayor and the city staff, and these are highly trained professionals, have been working through this process. It comes to us, we look at it, and we pick and choose what we think should and should not happen as if we are the mayor. But we do approve this budget, and I would put a cut if we had to. If we were in troubled times, there's a time to cut the budget. There's a time to reduce spending. There's a time for that. Now is not the time. Now's not the time to say to Rapid City, we're cutting your services by 6%, so 6% less potholes and all. Those are the things that we don't, it's unnecessary right now. There may be a day and a time when you do that, but we just sat up here and argued about 0.79% decrease in the library general fund budget, yet now we're going to say, oh, 6% off the top. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think if we were being foolish with the spending, if it hadn't already gone through some great due diligence, if we hadn't already seen the numbers and know where it's coming from and going to, I would have issues with it, but I don't have issues with it. Now, what I agree with Alderwoman Scott on is look at in the future how we use this undesignated cash. Perhaps there are some healthy practices, but right at the last minute when we have just a few weeks before it has to be turned in, and just say flat off the top 6%, and then at the end of the year, they can just come to us and we'll decide what's important. That's inefficient. You have a budget so that you know what to get to spend through the year, not just through part of the year, 85% or 90% or 95% of the year. That's not the way you do things. You say, here's what we need to operate this year, and hopefully we spend that money wisely and come back next year with a new budget. And I think the problem is all of this happened so late. I felt like the budget process was a little truncated. I would have loved to have seen the budget maybe in July, so we had more time. I'd have loved to have this conversation, I forget who said it, for several months ago, just because there's a lot of work, pre-work that goes into it, and we shouldn't discount that. I hate to tell you, but we're not the most important people in city government. All of us are. We have a vote, but there's a lot of work that happens months before it gets here, and that should be respected. And I appreciate what the mayor's done in this new process, and we're transitioning to priority-based budgeting, and we're not quite there yet. It would make it a whole lot easier if we were, but we're not. And I think we have this discussion now. We're planting the seed for how we should do things, but I just can't right now in September when we have to have this approved by the end of the month say 6% across the top just because I think we should. So I will not be supporting this, and I urge my council members to approve this budget as is. Let's talk about how we move forward with it, but we're so late in the process that I think we're going to create some issues moving forward. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
18 tomorrow.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to thank my other council members for this spirited discussion. That is why we have these discussions, so that we can hear each other out, make points, really actually think as we talk sometimes. And I have to say that although I came here not with wedding night jitters, I have thought this through and thought the 6% was the way to go. But now I have been swayed by the conversation here. You know, Brad has said several times he's come to these meetings with his mind made up, and by God, he comes out and he's ready to vote, and it's changed. So for the sake of harmony, for respect for our mayor and the staff and the work they've done, I believe that I can go ahead and approve the budget at this point in its second reading. Yes, I'm changing my mind, and that is the prerogative of a council person when they've heard the arguments and they've thought it through, that maybe it's better to let the experts do their work. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to vote on the amendment now, which is to cut the general fund budget by 6%, except for the government building section, which is $886,833 for the government buildings. Stand by, I'm being corrected.
You listed as
You were talking about the doll. Okay, sorry, folks, my misunderstanding on what exactly was exempt from this cut. It is the subsidies and buildings category, which is $4,418,752. So it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of $58 million will be cut by 6% with this motion. The motion also includes to remove the $50,000 council contingency, and I think that's it. So those in favor of this amendment signify, let's just skip that. Go to a roll call, please. Those in, yeah, go to roll call.
Laurenti. Wright.
Absolutely.
Modrick.
No.
Roberts.
Absolutely, yes.
Nordstrom. Drew.
Nice.
Solomon.
Change back now?
You just changed back.
Solomon. Doyle. Estes. Scott. Motion fails 3-7.
Okay, now we're back to the original motion, and we'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion that we adjust the general fund budget by 3%, except for the subsidies and buildings and the council contingency of $50,000. If I get a second, I guess I'd like to try to explain why. Thank you. Just 3%. Here, you know, and I see people shaking their heads, and I got it. So somebody said, why 6%? Well, 6% equals the amount of undesignated cash we have in this budget. And everything I'm going to say, Mr. Mayor, is meant to be as a compliment, but sometimes it might be kind of a dig. But last year, you said, by God, this isn't my budget. This is the previous mayor's budget, and next year, you'll have my budget, and we're gonna get down to business. Well, you did a great job. I mean, you put more time in than anybody's ever seen. Nobody's ever doubted that a bit. You've been complimented, but the problem is we didn't quite get there. And you've done a great job. You've said there's more to it than you thought. You've been very humble about it. But the bottom line, in one of your presentations, Mr. Mayor, you showed that this budget is using roughly $3.6 million worth of undesignated cash to balance it, which is one-time money. What happened? I mean, we sit here and we say, well, the economy is going really great. We're growing, and what are we going to do to our people? Well, what are you going to do next year? There's a lot of uncertainty out here, and it wouldn't take much to change stuff. And what are you going to do when you don't? What if you didn't have that undesignated cash, the availability of it to balance the budget? You will be cutting. And I think it would be great for us to try to wean off half of that undesignated cash. You've heard the finance officer sit here and say, you know, we haven't had to use it. So, but 3.6 is a heck of a load. I mean, so, you know, and I do this with some reservation also because we've sit here and we've changed the budget process, where before we had all the department directors come in. And in my mind, the department directors, when they came in, they were fighting for that last 5 to 6 to 10% of their budget. So now we're pulling this back out, and we're telling them to come in, and we're just changing We're just changing when they come in and give their presentation. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see going forward, once the mayor does an entire budget based upon the priority-based budgeting, how this council feels about it, and if they're going to trust it and embrace it. And see, Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to be touching you, see if you can really pull some money out, to see if you really have the ability. I don't really like this, but to me, it's the lesser of two evils. You know, and I have concerns. I look at the city attorney's budget. You know, all budgets aren't created. The city attorney's budget is almost all labor. Well, he's going to have to come in right away and ask for his portion, or it will impact him. I don't think it'll impact some of the larger ones that have, you know, where there's maybe 40% of their budget's labor or 50%, you know. I think they got some time to watch, and maybe they won't. Maybe we'll luck out. Maybe things will really keep going and the revenue will go up, and they won't have to come in. But it's a compromise. And, you know, I was hoping there was a way we could take all the undesignated cash out of this budget by finding equipment, large equipment purchases, and finding a different source in which to purchase them. But finance officer I went through, and we only found about $1.25 million worth of stuff, and you're gonna have, you know, you'd save maybe $1 million because you're gonna have a payment in that first year anyway. So that was not an avenue. But the 6%, I know where Alderwoman Scott came up with the 6% originally. It was just a way to take out the undesignated cash. We have to be, I mean, it doesn't matter how big we're rolling and what we think we might be doing to the staff. If you're spending one-time undesignated cash to the tune of about $4 million, I don't want to exaggerate, 3.6, that's not real fiscal responsibility. So I just see it as if we can cut that in half, I see it as a compromise that I throw out there to my colleagues. I yield. Thank you.
Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to be politically correct, don't I?
No, you
Oh, good, because we're just in a hearing. So we just went through several hours of good debate, good discussion about do we need to slash? Are we in a position that the city has to slash? Why are we slashing? Why are we coming up with a number? And now we've got a new motion on the floor of, well, let's compromise the number, when really the discussion wasn't even looking for a compromise. It was saying it's a solid budget. We've got plans with a new process, which isn't this year. It's coming, and we don't even know if it'll be next year, but it's going to be integrated at some point. But we can't count on it. We've got the funds in the bank. They do us absolutely no good if we have an opportunity to get some of the enforcement, the public safety, the needs of our departments, every one of our departments have great needs. If they didn't, then they also wouldn't have gone through the budget process that they did to provide nominal increases so that they can catch up. This is about catching up. And 1.5, where are we going to put that? That just goes back into the general fund as an undesignated amount that we're not going to use again when we've actually got it. And I don't believe our bank is anywhere close to hitting any reserves, and maybe that's a request I need to ask of the finance officer, because the funding is the reason why we're working on this budget as it is on the income side versus the expense side is because the funding is there, the need and the use is there by our departments. It doesn't do anybody good in the bank. 1.5 million is peanuts on a $160 million budget. And it's also it's a very conservative budget. If we remember, we all looked at this weeks ago and we all realized it's a conservative budget. It's not It's not going forward in any way at all. So we're using conservative numbers, which once again says there isn't a reason to put money in the bank and not use it if we have an opportunity to grow our community and grow it with the departments that have the need. And I entrust, this is something we all need to work on, I entrust our government process, and I trust the way we do it, and I do trust the fact that the mayor worked his line item with the departments months in advance, provided us what we needed weeks in advance, and now we're going to try to play the numbers game. And if this doesn't go, then what? Do we say 1%? I mean, are we going to roll the dice and come up with a number that we don't even need to come up with? It's once again in my full support that we have a good and balanced budget. Its budget is balanced conservatively, and it needs to go through. We know that 2018 is going to provide a different view, and I kind of like the idea that it's going to be started early. I believe that it is. I think all the departments are going to be working early with priority-based budgeting, and it'll be a whole new view. But right now, we're still working off of how we do our budgets, and this is how we do them. We need to pass this forward. It's in second reading. I don't believe it needs any more edits, and I cannot support 3%.
John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Boy, this would have been a lot more simplified if we'd have just had budget hearings and brought every department in to ask for what they wanted. You know, $1.6 million on $160 million budget is really just 1% of the budget. We're not talking 3%. We're talking 3% of the general fund budget, but 1% of the entire budget. So if you cut every department across the board by 1%, I don't see gloom and doom going there. And, you know, some of these departments that have their own funding sources, you know, we can use some of that money there from them. So, you know, I think the idea, and I really give Councilman Estes credit for bringing this forward. He just kind of blew me away and shocked me that he did this. I think that, you know, this is, if we did the budget hearings like we did for years, like the last 5 I sat on, and the departments just brought everything forward, Pauline would have been asking for us to use about $1.8 million of the undesignated cash, or 2.3, okay. But we still would have ended up less than we are right now. And, you know, I think we're going in a good direction. I can tell you where $250,000 can come from right away. So, you know, there's a good start. But anyway, I just want to give the mayor credit for bringing forward a good budget, and Councilman Estes credit for bringing forward what I think is a good idea and a compromise. So, thank you.
Jerry Wright.
Well, I figuratively said it's the night before the wedding. I think what I'm about to say is probably going to cost me some family friends. But, you know, this is half the money, but just as preposterous. Because we've gone through a lengthy discussion and debate through the staff and the mayor to develop the budget that we have. And any guidance that the council leadership wanted to impose upon this budgetary process should have occurred months ago, not tonight. And I think that to make it just I think it's draconian is the word I want to use, to say we're going to make a 3% or 1.5% across the line cut. We don't know what it's going to do, where it's going to hurt, what's going to help. It's across the line. Very poor management. It's purely political. And I think that's sad. I think if we want to set some guidelines like this for the next budget cycle as a council, let's do it starting tomorrow for 2018, but not tonight. We have a budget before us, as I've said earlier, prepared by the mayor and his staff, the people that know what needs to be done. We are not in a financial crisis. We have things that we need to do. A cut is a cut. A cut will do to us what the crash of 2007 and 2008 did. Maybe not to the same extent, but it'll still do it. It'll hurt us. So I ask members of the council, do not support this amendment and vote for the council or the budget that the mayor submitted to us. Thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also will, in a few minutes, take up your challenge to discuss the revenue side. But right now, I want to talk a little bit about the motion. Basically, for me, this is a plan that is no plan, which is a plan to fail. And I think without having a proper plan in place to put something like this together ahead of what we need to do and how things are to be accomplished makes more sense. But right now, we don't have a plan how to proceed. I envision that later on we'll have to the departments will have to come back and do additional supplementals, even to this compromise, which in my mind is still not a compromise. And the other thing that talking about is the forecasting with a crystal ball here. I've got to admit, maybe I'm looking through a different twisted crystal ball here for my budgeting sense, is that right now with this proposed compromise, it doesn't work for my crystal ball, and maybe because it is twisted in a different angle, but it just doesn't work even with this compromise. And again, it's not a plan. We don't have a very good, effective plan coming forward to make up a good, sound budget, whereas the mayor has already done that process. Thank you.
Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think if we had, maybe this is a good idea, Alderman Estes. Maybe it would be a good idea, but I think you would need time to study it intelligently and say which departments could have more to cut than other departments. I think you brought up a great point with City Attorney's Office being mostly staff, so you're just going to say, well, you got to cut your salaries by 3%, or else at the end of the year come to us and we'll make sure you can still get your paychecks. Or I'm not sure how that applies without smart, intelligent study with data to say here's where we think those cuts could be efficiently used. So if we said 3% of the general fund needs to go from somewhere, not just every department, to be fair, if we were to say something like that and had the time to study that and say here's where it can be, here's why, then I think I could say, okay, that makes sense. There's a plan, there's rationale behind it, but there's no rationale. It's just ad hoc, 3% or whatever percent off the top. I'd rather see us have a plan, study, intelligent discussion on where to efficiently use our resources, and if resources need to be dedicated to more places, do that, less places the other, but I don't want to be so random about it. I want to be intentional and strategic with our cuts. This is not a strategic cut. This is a random cut. Let's be strategic with our spending. Let's be strategic with our cutting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for letting me have a couple minutes. I brought this to the council's attention on a 10-year chart of how much undesignated cash had been used each year to balance the city budget, with a high of just under $4.5 million annually to a low of under $500,000 annually. And I also noted that since 2012, 2013, the trend has been turning upward again. So now we're right around $3.5 million. And I think this is the wrong direction. I think this is a trend that should be reversed. And trends can't be reversed by making a one-time adjustment. We didn't get to $3.5 million in 1 year. We didn't get half of that in 1 year. I think the smart approach is to take this year by year and trim down the undesignated cash year by year. The result of the cut or the result of not cutting is the same, essentially. The city will be funded. It will just put the council in an unusual position of micromanaging that budget, and I don't mean that as an insult, although I usually use that term as an insult, but I'm not this time. Trust me. But the things that have gone on behind the scenes in the last several months to cut this budget are things that you can't really be aware of because I didn't keep a journal of it. But millions, a couple of $1 million was taken out of this budget before the 2017 FTEs were added. Some big adjustments, an effort's being made to level the budget so that we don't have unusually high expenses from one year to the next. So those agencies needing equipment replacements or building renovations or so on, we're encouraging them to budget in a levelized fashion so that we get a more consistent budget picture. So the end will be the same either way. So then I just submit that therefore it's unnecessary. We're not going to save money by cutting this right now. It won't save money. It will just spend the remainder of that budget differently. And what I don't think is a good decision is to put those management duties on the council, to bring department heads here to say, well, we need a new lawnmower, and put the council in a position to say, well, can't you wait till next year? Because those decisions have already been carefully made over the last several months. So that's an unfair position for council or for departments to be in. So I'm telling you that I brought this up for a reason. This trend that we ought to take an approach at reversing this trend that is reasonable and purposeful, and but I appreciate the discussion. I almost never appreciate a long discussion, but I appreciate this one because I've got to hear a lot of things about it, and I think that really the motion is rooted mainly in idealism, which I appreciate also. We should be willing to stick to our guns and do this type of thing. I just don't think there's any benefit to this particular cut in the long run. So that's all I have to say. So the motion, correct me if I'm wrong, for amendment number 4 is to reduce the general fund by 3%. And did you say eliminate the 50,000?
Yeah, it just duplicate.
Okay, eliminate the 50,000 contingency and not include the subsidies and government buildings section.
Correct.
Understood? So a yes means you're in favor of that motion and no means you're against it. So let's go to roll call.
Wright? Absolutely. Modrick? No. Roberts? Yes. Nordstrom? No. Drew? No. Solomon? No. Doyle? No. Estes? Scott? Yes. Durante?
Aye.
Motion failed, 4-6.
Okay, now we're back to the original motion as amended. Any speakers? Richie Nordstrom.
Mayor, if I may just take up you on your challenge of talking a little bit about the revenue side. Most of it speaks for itself, and you did a good presentation in your budget. I agree with you that some areas need to be taken a look at a little bit deeper, and some of the areas that I was just thinking of that we passed this last year on the revenue side was that we did several licenses and fees that were readjusted this last summer, and those also need to be considered as part of the revenue stream. I don't know if that is absolutely, because I don't have all, 1,000 line items that you have in your budget, but I'm sure, I feel confident that they are within these revenue side. So just a reminder that it was those a revenue generating stream. And then also another, probably for me as a secondary factor, is that on the enterprise funds, I know they're sometimes counted as a revenue stream and sometimes not counted, depending on who's making that presentation. But again, I feel confident those were part of your numbers in the overall $160 million budget presentation. So I feel confident that those numbers, and we're also probably looking at a fee study coming up on one of the departments as well. So I feel very comfortable that those amounts are considered, but were not talked about very much. So just some food for thought in your consideration on the revenue side.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And on the revenue side, I take this for what it's worth. I'm a government person talking about business. But we have a dip in sales tax revenue in the few months leading up to Christmas. And it dips significantly. I feel like that's a valley in the chart that could be filled in by buying local. Everyone up here on this dais has probably purchased something online. Well, maybe 9 people have purchased something online recently. It's become so easy. So I think 2 things. There has to be some kind of a reason for the average consumer to buy locally. They have to be patriotic about this city and dedicated to the city's well-being, and keeping property taxes and so on low. But also, the businesses have to be able to compete with the online marketplace, and that would be having an online storefront and considering doing some of the same things that Amazon is doing to get people's money, to free delivery and a good selection online and so on. We have got to step up as a community and be one that competes with the online sales. That's just sales tax. Of course, we have a lot of resources and attention going into visitors and that sort of thing. But this is a big picture. There's no hidden gem that's going to double our revenue. But there are many small improvements that can be made to create the overall picture. So that's what I talk about. That's what I'm saying when I'm talking about being concerned with the revenue side. I'm fairly confident that our new commitment, or our refocused commitment to economic development, will produce long-term results. But it's not going to change anything in the next 12 months. So just said that so that I could say it. Now we'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I want to thank you for all your work on the budget. And the first reading, I voted for it, and just in this past amount of time, I guess some people think it's irresponsible for me to come up with my concerns at this time. But I think spending that kind of one-time money causes me some pause. And imagine if you didn't have it, and imagine what are you choosing today, $3-some million worth of stuff that's one time that you don't get to do next year. So it's, you have it, but you can't always count on it. So if I'm irresponsible, I guess I can handle that. So anyway, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Darla Drew.
Final comment here, and I'm sorry about my misvote there. However, I think it's important that the big departments feel what it's like to be on the chopping block. It doesn't feel good every year to be looking at the same people and have them defend their budgets. So I think that it's okay that we look at everyone and say, hey, maybe you aren't going to be funded at the same levels every year. And you might want to think about that. And you might want to be able to defend that next year. So, because we might change the process. I mean, that's what I'm hearing here. We are willing to look long-term and think about the way we make decisions and just not do things as the same old way. As the mayor has said, it's not status quo. It's not guaranteed. We're going to be looking at the priorities of the city. And I just think it's a good thing that the Public Works or the other departments feel what other groups feel every single year when our budget process comes up. Thank you.
Okay, the motion on the table is to approve the second reading of the appropriation ordinance as amended. with a SAFER grant of $529,371. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
Okay, the motion passes with 2 noes.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.